been waiting for 40-odd years because we've got his photograph. We got his fingerprints. When will it happen? Then they'll come for you.
He didn't fit the typical armed robber that people might see in the movies.
He didn't really speak. All I can remember was his really starey eyes.
How did you come up with this method?
Oh, because I've watched bad television.
Are you concerned you could be off to jail today? The shameful secret was hidden for more than 40 years.
Did this come as a big
shock? Of course no one knew anything about Ross's other job. What a con artist.
Sorry.
He was charged with 27 fraud offences.
There was many millions of dollars involved. Ross really reminds me of Melissa Caddick. I really believe, you know, that is the slimiest type of crook.
Yes, okay.
Thank you.
Well, my real name is Carl Barrington Fay, and I'm known as Barry in the forensic science section of the police force. I've been retired from the police forensic section for 30 years and I'm 86 years old. When I look back at my career with the New South Wales Police Force, one sentence springs to mind. The science of fingerprints. If you've ever been to a crime scene, you'd recognise us because we're the ones dusting down the windows and doors with those little brushes. What we're looking for are latent or hidden fingerprints, which are the surface impressions left behind by the bad guys. We could go, or we were asked to go, to almost every crime in Sydney. One day in 1977, my team was called out to a job in Chatswood, where the Commercial Savings Bank of Australia had been held up. This is where a particular offender first came onto my radar thanks to the bank's closed-circuit cameras. Thank you. Yes, that's the offender. Now, this is not your average bank robber. See the starched collar on his business shirt, the fitted jumper, the tailored slacks, and those dress shoes. Another point of interest was the demand note the felon had written for the bank teller. This is a hold-up. I have a gun in this bag, no false moves. $2,000, please. Pass the note over, and while they're reading it, you push a small calico bag towards them to put all the money in, and all the time he's got this big shopping bag with his hand in it and the butt of a pistol showing. Was the gun real? We didn't know at that stage, but we did have a nickname for the bandit. The one in this particular case we called the Hat. He covered his head, demanded what was in the teller's drawer, never asked anybody to go to the safe or anything like that, and calmly walked out. Happily for us, the Hat left something behind, a partial fingerprint on his note of demand. To search a single fingerprint, which was generally only half there, a partial fingerprint, was almost impossible. We didn't have computers. All we had at the CIB was a huge room full of files filled with millions of fingerprints from known offenders, but not the hat. They did search him, but for some reason, no, he wasn't found. He had no criminal record. From what we could deduce, the hat appeared to work alone. He arrived at the bank on foot and left on foot, and he never caused much of a fuss inside the bank.
I have that.
Ryan, take one.
I've read the facts of his case. Even though he struck terror into the heart of the tellers, no one was hurt, and there were no valuable leads to go on. In those days, you had to prioritise what you did. It was pretty busy. I remember one year we had more bank armed robberies than New York had. They'd come into banks, they'd burst into the chamber, they'd fire shots into the ceiling. They'd threaten civilians. It was quite ugly.
The hat was not violent, but he still needed to be brought to justice. What I was hoping for was a better fingerprint. And the hat obliged me a few weeks later when he robbed another bank in the Sydney CBD. Oh, yes, yes. We have a nice clear thumbprint over the top of another thumbprint. In the trade, we called this fingerprint a superimposed double thumbprint. It's about as good as it gets for a latent fingerprint. We could use that as if he'd been fingerprinted at a police station. The key to the whole bank robber details was in this double image. I was now able to compare a swag of partial fingerprints I'd collected from other bank jobs to my new gold standard double thumbprint, and that led to a breakthrough. I coupled 7 banks together to this man who in some cases would reappear within 10 days. This was exciting news. I could now link the hat to 6 bank robberies in the Sydney CBD, as well as the one in Chatswood where his photo had been taken. But then, just when I thought I was getting somewhere, the hat stopped robbing banks. Around 1979, we're expecting more notes to come in. They stopped. The whole case stalled. 12 years later, he still hadn't been identified. So I thought it was high time to make an appeal to the public for information. We published a photograph of him in the newspaper and spoke about that we wanted to interview him in regard to bank hold-ups. The newspaper people came up with a new name. He wasn't the hat anymore, he was the polite bandit. The reporters were amused by what he'd written on his first letters of demand when he was robbing all those banks. He asked to hand over $2,000, please. And there was no threats, no nothing. He wanted it like a little boy asking for a lolly. The polite bandit, he didn't have people saying, please, hand me all your stolen money. We had a few people contact us and we checked out some leads, but they all came to nothing. The polite bandit was still out there, but beyond the reach of the law. I was in constant touch with the fingerprint section and their bosses, and I would often mention it, especially as they were ringing me about cold cases. I asked my police colleagues at the fingerprint section to keep checking their records because over the years, new technology meant anyone with a criminal record had their fingerprints automatically uploaded to the police database. And then one day, we hit the jackpot. Yes, 2018, the senior fingerprint experts at Parramatta knocked on my door one day and said, "We've got a present for you, and you now have authority as the Americans have with a gold badge." I said, "Well, how much do I owe you for this?" And they said, "No, it's free of charge because of the murders and that you've solved." I said, "Thank you." And then I remembered this fingerprint again. Just out of the blue, I said, "Well, you can have a reward. Here's that best fingerprint I ever found of a bank robber. See what you can do with it." And within 2 days, they're ringing me up saying, "We've found the offender." Ross McCarty.
My name is Musa Adalis. I'm a detective with the New South Wales Police Force. I'm attached to the State Crime Command's Robbery and Serious Crime Squad. In 2018, I was told that the squad had received a file in relation to a fingerprint hit to a string of bank robberies which occurred in the late 1970s, and I was handed the case. The first thing was to collect the original case file from the police archives. So I rushed straight down and picked up an old folder which had been sitting in the repository for over 40 years. I sat down, I put a pair of gloves on and I opened it up, and the documents had a unique smell to them and an eerie smell to them. When I saw the CCTV still, I immediately printed out a charge photograph of our suspect that the fingerprints had been linked to, and I was quite amazed to see the striking similarities between both images. My priority now was to track down the tellers of the armed robberies.
I don't want to reveal my identity, but here's my story. My name's Kim, and I was working in Sydney as a bank teller in March 1978 when the bank was held up. It was called the National Bank of Australasia Limited back in those days, I think. National Australia Bank. 249 Pitt Street branch. It was right next door to the Hilton Hotel. It usually was busy around lunchtimes, but I don't remember that day being particularly busy at that time that he came into the branch. This chap came to the counter and he just, passed the note over to me, and the note basically said he wanted 2,050s. I've got a gun in the bag and no tricks. I probably went as white as a ghost and the blood just rushed from my face and whatever else. It was quite frightening because you didn't know whether he was just going to jump over that counter. All I can remember was his really starey eyes You know, you think he's got a gun in his bag and he's just staring at you. What are you going to do? You know, you're just going to give him what he wants. And that's exactly what I did.
I did some research into Ross McCarty's background. He didn't fit the typical armed robber that people might see in the movies. He was a corporate employee. He had a well-paying job. He was in the finance sector. He was a very smart man.
My name is Amber Reithmuller. Ross McCarty was a friend of my parents. My mother told me that he was a private schoolboy. He attended Shaw in the 60s. He was in the cadet corps. And I believe he played rugby. And then he moved into working in the financial markets. In the 70s, he worked in fixed income securities at Potter's Partners stockbroking in O'Connell Street. And he was married to a very glamorous lady named Gould. The way it's been described to me is that they were real high flyers. Gould was always dressed, you know, beautifully, impeccably, and they lived, you know, a very high-end lifestyle. Ross and Gould were at my parents' wedding in 1973. You know, it was your classic 70s wedding, lots of bad hair. The photo that stands out for me is the one of Ross and Gould, where it looks like Ross is hatching a plan to steal the silver. He loved money and he loved showing off with money. There was one party that they had, I believe it was their 10th wedding anniversary, which I believe would have been in the early 80s. Mum and Dad attended that party at the Wentworth Hotel. It would have cost an absolute mozza. You know, they had entertainment, live music, and, you know, really sort of laid it on for everyone. Of course, no one knew anything about Ross's other job as a bank robber. Wow. Gosh. He looks so cocky.
The first bank robbery we could link to Ross McCarty was on the 3rd of June in 1977 at 11 Broadway. It's a radio station now, but back then it used to be a branch of the CBC Bank. McCarty worked in O'Connell Street in the northern CBD, which is probably a 30-minute walk or a 10-minute bus ride. He walked away with $1,300 in his shopping bag. "11 days later, he hit the Rural Bank on George Street near the Sydney Town Hall, and he stole $2,250 in cash. Next, he robbed another bank on George Street. He took $1,943 that time. He also robbed an ANZ bank in Pitt Street. Then McCarty went over the bridge to rob a bank in Chatswood. We don't know why he went north side, but he stole $1,400. This was the first time we got a photo of McCarty thanks to the bank's CCTV camera. Then he's back in the CBD where he does another 2 robberies. All the robberies occurred after noon, in the last few hours of trading for the banks. Why then? And what was McCarty's motive? He was a man that appeared to have everything in life. Why become a bank robber?
Got him?
Got that.
Guy, take one.
My name's Guy Goldsmith. I'm a detective in New South Wales Police. I've been a policeman for 28 years. Detective Adalis was on my team and he came to me with this case. Then we began the investigation through the discovery of this fingerprint linked to Ross McCarty. We established through inquiries that he was residing in a unit in Edgecliffe. So in December, just before Christmas, is the day that we decided to go and knock on his door. Early in the morning, a number of police turned up at his place and everybody wanted to have a look at this person in the flesh.
It was a very exciting day. I knew Ross McCarty himself would be shocked after all these years, police coming knocking on his door. When I knocked on the door, it was Ross that answered it. I said, "You're under arrest for multiple bank robberies which were committed back in the 1970s. His wife was also present at the door and the colour just drained from her face, and I'll never forget that moment.
The door was answered by Ross. Even though he denied at the start, I could tell from that point that he knew what we were talking about. Okay, yeah, you got me. Usually we're dealing with armed robbers that are well-built, aggressive-looking. This was not. You're talking about a nearly 70-year-old man. He's quite frail.
Ross McCarty was taken back in a police car to Waverley Police Station. He was introduced to our custody manager, and just like every other prisoner that comes into the police station, he gets read his rights. I can sense that even on the way back to the police station, that Ross would at least give us a version of his involvement in some of these crimes. And he did exactly that.
You need further information of what evidence is against you before you
No, I think,
comment?
look, I did commit some offences and I want to cooperate.
Ross was quite frank with us. His description of what he was doing and why he did it, he was very open.
I was working in the city.
Where were you working?
I was working for a stockbroker.
Where was that address, do you remember?
Yes, it was in 20 O'Connell Street.
And what was your occupation?
I was a floor trader.
So you could come and go during the day as you please?
Well, pretty much, but these are, I think, just about all of them are in the afternoon after boozy lunches.
And that's what I was going to say, the times are very consistent.
So I'd get boozed at lunchtime and go and do it. I was visiting gambling joints. I was blowing everything.
He had developed an alcohol and gambling problem. We have no evidence outside of what he's telling us of that. However, that's his explanation of why he had to start committing these matters. What did you do with the money?
Paid off debts.
Was it to the same particular person?
There was a guy that used to, made it known that the debts should be repaid. So, in a nice way.
What type of gambling was it?
Blackjack. It was a gambling club. It was one of those little casinos. Free booze.
Yeah, okay.
So, that was the main reason. But I used to get liquored up and it kind of snowballed because the worse, the more I did, the worse I felt about the whole thing. And it was leading a double life. So...
You mean double life from your wife?
Well, from everybody.
Ross tried to justify his actions by saying that he had a gambling debt. I don't necessarily believe it. I think Ross knew exactly what he was doing.
I was hardly ever home in those days.
Yeah.
It was always out, you know, especially when it was skinful.
Yeah.
Just a lot of these, I was pissed when I did the robbery. That's courage.
So you would leave work, drink alcohol?
Well, I'd go to lunch, you know, and it was, those days were boozy days. Everybody went to the pub, or everybody would drink at lunchtime. And don't forget, it was pre-FBT, pre-benefit tax, so it's all deductible. And I'd quite often have a few beers or something with a client or a colleague, and then I'll see you later, I've got to go and do something.
He would take his suit jacket off, put it behind the bar stool where he was drinking. He would leave the pub. He would go to a local store where he would purchase a hat and a pair of sunglasses.
Where did you get the hat from?
Oh, I don't know, there were lots of stores. I didn't keep a special hat.
That's the point where he would walk into a bank, commit the robbery, and return back to the pub where he was drinking to find his suit jacket still on the chair and his beer half drunk.
He would continue drinking that beer and then watch police with lights and sirens drive past the hotel he just returned to, attending the bank that he had just robbed. That's a very unusual scenario.
How did you come up with this method of doing the robbery in terms of going in there, filling out a withdrawal slip and presenting it to the bank?
I guess I've watched enough bad television.
We discovered a lot of things about Ross McCarty when we interviewed him at Waverley Police Station. But one question was top of my list.
So how come you eventually stopped committing the offences?
I got a really good job. Yeah, it was a job. I got a job at Bankers Trust, Australia.
Okay.
My career went onwards and upwards. Well, mid-80s I got approached by NatWest Investment Bank to set up their operations here.
It's ironic that McCarty later worked for banks, especially given his previous career robbing them. But he soon found himself in trouble again.
Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic, but it was pretty rampant then. And it was only a matter of time, and they did ask me to leave. But so that was the end of my short but brilliant career in investment banking.
It appears in the early 2000s, he started involving himself in other crimes, and that was fraud-related crimes.
I believe Gould and Ross sort of resurfaced in Mum and Dad's life in the early 2000s. My parents didn't know anything about Ross McCarty's secret life as a bank robber. No one did at that stage. All we knew was that Ross and Gould were still living the high life. They were living in Mossman, overlooking Balmoral. They had a large block of land there, and my understanding is they actually bought the block adjacent as well. I think what happened between my father and Ross McCarty is that Ross initially softened Dad up by persuading him to invest some money, promising a good return, which he delivered on. So I believe that's probably why my father trusted him and invested more. Dad was a thrill seeker. He loved adventure and very passionate motorsport enthusiast. Yeah, he loved going fast. On July 26, 2009, my father had snuck out of town to go for a couple of days heli skiing in New Zealand. Unfortunately, an avalanche was triggered and my father was killed. Interestingly enough, Ross and Gould turned up at the house, I would say within 24 hours after my father died. That's when I really first met Ross, and he pulled me aside at the house and said to me, you know, not to be concerned, but that he actually owed my father some money. I probably just really thought, oh, he's a good guy, at least he's come forward and been honest about it, and it's not something that I'm going to have to pursue. Through a paper trail and digging through my father's emails, I was able to piece together, you know, what had happened. I established that my father had given him $150,000. It was for what was supposed to be a cleaning business. Well, it was a good old-fashioned Ponzi scheme. Ross McCarty, really, in reality, you know, he was just pocketing the money. Ross paid my mother's solicitor a small amount off the debt, something like $10,000 or $15,000. But by then the solicitor smelt a rat. Ross McCarty knew that my father's estate would pursue the money. Ross was always one step ahead of the game, and he actually handed himself into police.
There were no charges, no investigations, no nothing. I decided I wanted to clear the slate. So I got a lawyer who was absolutely bloody hopeless. So I prepared the case, brought in a full folder of documents documenting every transaction, who the victims were and how much they were owed.
What a con artist.
You don't believe anything of that?
No, not one word.
He was charged with 27 fraud offences, and there was a number of people that were victim of those offences as well.
My understanding was that there was many millions of dollars involved. In fact, the amount we had lost was quite small compared to some of the other victims. Ross targeted family and friends. They were his marks. A lot of the victims weren't prepared to come forward. You know, obviously some high-profile people, and I think, you know, people are embarrassed to say that they've been scammed by a friend. By the time we got to court, it had been whittled down to about $1.2 million. And we just sat in the docks and obviously watched, you know, events and eyeballed Ross McCarty. When sentencing day rolled around, my mother and I, along with a family friend, were the only ones who turned up to see the judge's verdict. Our expectations were low. He was given an 18-month sentence with 9 months non-parole. He looked stunned. He absolutely looked shocked. I can't imagine he thought he was going to jail that day. We couldn't believe it. It was a miracle. I was satisfied knowing that he'd have to take some showers out at Long Bay for a while.
When Ross McCarty eventually confessed to robbing all those banks in the 1970s, I couldn't help thinking why he didn't fess up earlier.
McCarty had a chance to confess when he was arrested in 2010 for unrelated fraud offences. Police took his fingerprints and DNA, which years later would link him to the cold case crimes. The shameful secret was hidden for more than 40 years, until 2018, when the bank robber was arrested at his Edgecliffe home. It was on that day he finally came clean.
Do you remember at the time of these offences that got any media coverage?
Yes, there was one, polite bandit, I think was one of them.
Is that the media article?
Yep.
Okay. Did you read that?
Yes, yeah, I did see that, yeah.
And what were you thinking at that time when it was all over the news?
I was shitting myself.
In the end, we linked Ross to 7 armed robberies, and Ross disclosed a further bank robbery that he was involved in at the ANZ Bank in 1977 that we had no idea about.
His solicitor came to us with a written statement with photographs of newspaper articles of this further offence. So we were able to charge him with another offence.
And why do you think he did that?
The possibility that he was going to spend a lot of time in jail. If he comes in and confesses to another offence that we don't know about, that will work in his favour, is what he ultimately would have believed.
In his 71 years, Ross McCarty has lived many lives.
Are you concerned you could be off to jail today?
He basically entered a plea of guilty quite early. So in terms of the investigators' involvement in that matter, it's left up to the DPP. We really don't have any part of it.
Today, for the very first time, Ross McCarty apologised to the workers he traumatised. I could only imagine what terror I caused you as you bore the impact of my selfish egotism. It was a shameful period of my life. That was another life. It was another time.
I thought, what a load of bullshit.
Sorry, are you actually sorry, sir?
You know, he is a duplicitous grifter.
They're always sorry when they get before the judge and plead guilty. I would not place any weight on it at all. He would have done that on legal advice to show that he was remorseful. But the simple truth of the matter is that's to try and lessen his sentence.
Back in the 1970s, at the time of committing these offences, the sentence would have been far more significant. Armed with a firearm going into a bank, they're offences that carry 14 to 20 years jail.
He was sentenced to 3.5 years with a non-parole period of just under 2. McCarty won't be released until at least 2022, the same year as his 50th wedding anniversary. Do you think your husband deserved to go to jail today, Mrs. McCarty?
I was also absolutely thrilled with the additional sentence that he got, because I felt that he would have to serve more time in jail, and, you know, I was pleased about that.
I'd been waiting for 40-odd years, and Every time I did something about that story, I remember that song about bad boys. Bad boy, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? It was a theme used in Cops and other TV shows and things, and it always sort of reminded me of this case because we've got his photograph. We got his fingerprints. We got his evidence galore. When will it happen? And they'll come for you.
Prior to this investigation, I've never heard of the polite bandit. The truth is, he wasn't very polite at all. He terrorised the tellers, and the demand notes he wrote became increasingly threatening. Hold up, gun in bag, one move, I blow your head off. So the tellers would have assumed that the offender was carrying a firearm. They would have been extremely terrified.
He certainly wasn't violent. I didn't see a gun, although you don't want to know whether he had one or not. The stories were that he was under the influence of alcohol, but he didn't look unsteady to me. He didn't really speak. All I can remember was his really starey eyes. He just stared. I can remember sometimes closing my eyes to go to sleep, and I can see this man's eye. These piercing eyes is the thing that stays with me.
In a couple of those robberies, there was a reference to a firearm. Did you ever carry a firearm in the back?
No.
Ross McCarty lived a pretty normal life. He didn't bring attention to himself. He had a well-paying job. He wasn't a violent man. And I think that's why he was so successful in committing bank robberies for such an extended period of time, because he never drew attention to himself.
Was there anyone else involved in any of these incidents?
No, no one was involved before, during or after.
No one more shocked than his wife of 47 years.
Did you know your husband was a bank robber?
I was very shocked that my father had fallen victim to someone like Ross. He must have fully trusted Ross to part, with the money in the first place. Ross really reminds me of Melissa Caddick. Not on such a grand scale, but just where their victims are the people closest to them. I really believe, that is the slimiest type of crook.
A northbound breakdown on Lane Code Road at McCarty Park near Talavera Road. A speed car line with light and local traffic.
Barry Fay is the hero of this story. If it wasn't for Barry, I don't believe that Ross would have been caught by the police and brought to justice for all the bank robberies that he was responsible for. Barry was an exceptional police officer that obviously cared for his victims, he cared for his cases, and long after his retirement, this particular case stuck with Barry, and Barry just never let it go.
He continued to nudge the current forensic officers. Hey, just have a look at this. And thankfully in 2018, they finally had a match for Barry after 40 years.
Nothing in nature is duplicated, especially with fingerprints. If you cloned a human being today, he would have different fingerprints to the clone. Identical twins in every shape. have exactly the same DNA, but all their fingerprints are different. Today, it's a different world out there with the net. Call up a photograph, call up a fingerprint from 1,000 miles away, and you could find out. Crime never stops.
And Barry, you won't stop either, catching people like Ross McCarty.
I'm past my use-by date, if you know better. But if I still have something in my records, I might see an answer, and yes, I'd pass it on.